in my perspective, it was on the back of the United States federal court stomping on Christian Institute's attempt to use the RICO law to sue the Contra leadership in a bombing that happened in Nicaragua. And I thought, this is yet another example of oppression of the dissident voice that will go unnoticed by the dominant society. And so I committed at that time to kind of follow them. So Voices in the Wilderness reinvented themselves into Voices for Creative Nonviolence, which I think really resonates with the whole thread of what it means to commit to nonviolence. And so that was the beginning. And Brian is a member of the Catholic Worker. He actually knew Dorothy Day, who was a war tax resistor, for those of you who don't follow Dorothy Day. And again, one of my favorite things about Dorothy Day is that she committed to, no matter what the federal government said, how much she owed. My favorite story is, you tell me how much I owe and I won't pay it. So anyway, so Brian is our contemporary version of Dorothy Day and Peter Marin, and we are connected to him and their community and their witness that goes to Afghanistan, it goes to Iraq, it goes to Palestine, and so it's one of the threads that ties us in this international solidarity movement, and we're very, very grateful for you to be here today.
Thank you, friends. It's been an honor to come to Cleveland every few years, and I know some of you from previous visits. And to be a part of this discussion, I really believe there are times the criticism about we're always talking to the choir. Well, the choir has a whole lot to talk about, a whole lot of things we need to process and need to learn. And that's not a waste of time. This is very important that we do this. As part of what, with Voices for Creative Nonviolence, in recent years we've been visiting Afghanistan quite often and forging relationships with Afghan activists. And Yemen is a big issue now too. I'm going from here to New York City, where we will be protesting at the United Nations, the missions to the United Nations, about the United States, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia about the situation there. So I think, unfortunately, when we talk about the state of nonviolence, we also have to talk about the state of violence. And the 7th of this month, we passed a horrible milestone. 17 years since the attack on Afghanistan, which started from, Maria brought up how we got acquainted with me being in court in Jefferson City. I was arrested at Whiteman Air Force Base for protesting the drones that are being flown there, and eventually I got sentenced to 6 months in prison for that, for that action. But on October 7th, 2001, just a few weeks after 9/11, B-2 stealth bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri flew to Kabul, Afghanistan. This was the longest bombing raid in history, and violated Afghan airspace for the first time and started the bombardment on people. Probably none of the victims had any idea that 9/11 even happened, much less been a part of the responsibility for having that happen. Each plane had to have 2 crews to fly around the clock, 44 hours. And they had to 6 times refuel in the air to do this. And now, today, 24 hours, there are bombing raids on Afghanistan from Whiteman Air Force Base and many other places by drones, and people doing that people doing that by remote control on computer screens from thousands of miles away, and they're doing 8-hour shifts and sleeping in their own beds and spending the rest of the day with their families and doing as they please. So there's some progress there. Well, a couple of weeks after the bombing started, Dick Cheney, who was vice president at the time, was interviewed by the Washington Post, and he said that the war that had just begun may never end, and said that he predicted it would become a permanent part of the way that we live.
Oh, jeez.
The way I think of it, it's a new normalcy, Cheney said. And he explained that plans were being drawn up to expand that war to 40 or 50 other countries.
Oh.
Well, there's drone strikes and U.S. Special Forces engaged in like 72 countries today, beyond anything that he predicted. And this has cost trillions of dollars. It has made millions of casualties, tens of thousands dead, millions and millions of refugees. All that money that's wasted, it's not going down a rat hole, it's going somewhere. It's the statistics I have. The war is 64% of the federal discretionary budget, and that's $747 billion. $3.4 billion of that goes directly to corporations. This war is intended to be permanent. It's not intended to be won or resolved in any kind of way. It's meant to feed itself, and we see this perpetually. The General Michael Flynn, who was made famous, he was for a very short time the security advisor for Donald Trump. He had been the head of the intelligence division for the U.S. Armed Forces in Afghanistan, and he said that every weapon that we sell or deploy in the region, every soldier there, every airstrike, is actually only fueling the insurgencies there. It's fueling the conflict. It is not bringing it closer to the end. Just a few days ago, there was a week ago, there was a attack in Kandahar, and the general who was in charge, a warlord, in charge of the police there, was murdered, and General Stanley was wounded, and the target now we know is General Miller, who's the head of the U.S. forces, was the target, and several other people killed, and the Taliban is claiming credit for this, but the man who actually shot the gun was, I'm sure, in league with the Taliban, but he was somebody from the general's own bodyguard, somebody trained by the United States. His gun came from here. And now we're saying more troops in response to this attack, more troops. And that's not going to be the answer to it. It's feeding it, making sure that it doesn't end. In 1961, President Eisenhower, in his famous speech where he coined the words military-industrial complex, he said the time is not far off with all the money to be made in manufacturing weapons. He said, the time will come when we will no longer be manufacturing weapons to fight wars. We will be manufacturing weapons. Manufacturing wars so that we can sell weapons. And I think we've seen this. There was a very curious thing a couple of years ago in the LA Times uncovered that in Syria there were two rebel groups fighting each other. One was funded and armed by the CIA. The other funded and armed by the Defense Department. Now that seems insane. Except for the logic of the military-industrial complex, except for the money. The idea that you can keep killing people that will kill more people and keep the market going for weapons. One way where we see how normal this has gotten to be is how little protest there is. How in the last presidential election there was almost no talk about the wars, the so-called war on terror, the various wars going on around the world. When pressed, even Bernie Sanders said, "You see what Obama's doing?" He said, "All of that and more." The only one, ironically, who spoke at all about the war in any negative terms was Donald Trump. He said, pointed out rightly, we're spending billions of dollars, it's not going anywhere, and we're training these people and they're turning their weapons on us. We got to get out. Well, a year ago in August, he made a major speech, Donald Trump did, where he admitted he was wrong and said we're going to be staying in Afghanistan. And the establishment breathed a sigh of relief. The Hill, the magazine, the newspaper out of the Capitol, said that even his harshest critics have to admit that Donald Trump is acting presidential now. That this war is not going to end. Last month I was at a celebration in Milwaukee, 50 years since the Milwaukee 14, September of 1968. And this was the Milwaukee 14, explain it, for those who don't know, on that day in September 1968, 14 people walked into the draft board in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they just walked by the workers there, went to the file cabinets, and took 10,000 draft files. And they took them to a traffic triangle outside, and with homemade napalm, they found the recipe in a Special Forces handbook of gasoline and soap flakes. They made napalm and they burned 10,000 draft records. And in those days, there was no hard drive someplace, no backup. These were 10,000 boys from Wisconsin who could not be drafted, that they were taken out of the pool by this courageous action. And those, in this case, they're all men, and they all did 1 to 2 years in prison for this. And this was the third such action, but there were like 200 afterwards the next few years. Now, 1968 versus 2016, that election cycle is, well, we'd been in active combat in Vietnam at that point for 4 years, since 1964. And the national consensus all the way through was this is too much. Even Nixon got elected on the strength of his promise, I have a secret plan to get us out of Vietnam. Trust me. It was every candidate was asked, where do you stand on this? Where do you stand? There were riots outside, not caused by the protesters, but by Mayor Daley's police in Chicago. I was a little kid in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I remember, I was in junior high, and there were people walking out, I was not one of them, but people walking out of classrooms, junior high kids, in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So there was an uprising and a passion that this had to end that is just absent now. And I really believe a big part of it is that it's just been accepted as normal. Now in Afghanistan, I work, when I go there, the people that I hang out with are mostly very young people. The median age in Afghanistan now is a couple months over 18 years. So most of the people who are there, the majority of the population were babies, were not born yet when this war started. And everyone there has lived through horrific traumas. And war is normal for them, and I'm just really afraid has become normal for us, and we can't let that be. We can't let that be normal. The underpinning to all of this, too, is nuclear weapons. I happened by accident to come upon the peace vigilers at the West Side Market and went to coffee later. It was fun to meet you all. And one thing we talked about is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Doomsday Clock they put out every year. And in January, they said that we were 2 minutes to midnight. That's how close we are to a nuclear war. In 1968, it was 17 minutes, and people couldn't stand that. You know, it spurred a movement, you know, to end the testing of nuclear weapons, and a movement to reach some accords with Russia that are being abrogated now as we speak. So we're in a very, very dangerous situation, but without people paying attention and being very, very aware of it. Now in 2009, President Obama announced what he called stockpile stewardship. And this was for the life extension of deteriorating nuclear weapons in the United States arsenal, to ensure, quote, safety, security, and reliability of nuclear weapons. Safety, security, and reliability of nuclear weapons. What the hell does that mean? And stewardship. Stewardship it's a dictionary definition of stewardship is the careful management of resources. So we're exercising $1 trillion. It's going up, but Obama pledged $1 trillion for stewardship of nuclear weapons, not stewardship of our infrastructure, our roads and tunnels, water supplies, hospitals, schools, of nuclear weapons. And life extension at a time when the last 2 years the Center for Disease Control has said that the life expectancy of American citizens has declined, and we're about the lowest among all the developed nations. $1 trillion toward the life extension of nuclear weapons, to be sure that these will be safe and reliable into the future. And again, that's money taken, all the things we can imagine that $1 trillion could do that aren't being done in our society. And of course, most of that money doesn't really exist. It's borrowed, but then it goes, the arms manufacturers are not, they're getting the real cash out of this. So it's the burden we're putting on later generations, you know, in so many ways. And what it's doing home, the war coming home. We talked over coffee too about how the U.S. Justice Department has a very robust program encouraging police departments and helping fund police departments hiring returning combat veterans for police departments to hire them. And the federal government will help train and pay these returning soldiers. And of course, they need help getting jobs. They need help reintegrating to society after what we've done to them. But given guns and put into delicate situations, dangerous situations, there was a study in Dallas, Texas, where the people the police officers in Dallas who are veterans are twice as likely to fire their weapons than the police officers who are not veterans. The availability of heroin in this country, the market has never been so flooded. Heroin has never been cheaper than it is right now due to the war in Afghanistan. I think I'm a little bit about talking about divestment, and there's some very good groups from the United States and abroad. The International Committee for Nuclear Disarmament has a ban the bomb, or defund the bomb, don't bank on the bomb program. Code Pink is very much working on this. People looking at their pensions and their bank accounts and the investments in their universities and where this money is coming from. And it's really pretty fantastic, the amount of money that is being made available beyond our taxes. And understand next week is going to be the National Committee for Tax Resistance is going to be meeting here and to talk to, learn about, get great resources about how you can keep your tax money from going to this. But it depends on a whole lot more. But I have to say, as Maria says, I come out of the Catholic worker tradition since I dropped out of school when I was 19 years old, a long time ago. And I think the kind of sheepish talking about it because Kathy Kelly always talks, she will introduce me and say, and Brian's never paid taxes in his life, federal income tax in his life. And I'm not really a resistor. I really don't have any ambition. I've never earned any money enough to pay taxes. And it wasn't, since I just haven't wanted that money. I live on a farm. We raise goats and chickens and raise most of our food. And I haven't wanted it. When my kids were, I have 2 children, when they were younger, I had a regular job for a few years, but that kept me at minimum wage. That kept me with the. So I think, but I think also I've just been wanting to divest from capitalism in a more general kind of way, and trying to live my life in that way. I just want to